Konami is sort of the drug addict family member of the game industry. They were a good kid, got good grades at school, always listened to his parents, but once he got older, he started rebelling and started doing illegal shit, like creating a game that can't go full screen. Like, what the fuck? Toyonaka Osaka founded the company in 1969 as a jukebox rental and repair business, but after realizing how lame that was, he transformed the business into a manufacturer for arcade machines. By far the biggest of these arcade games is Frogger, where you get to the top half of the screen without dying. Fuck! Also, am I the only one that thinks it's weird how he can't swim? The dude just drowns. You'd think he'd thrive in this kind of environment, but no, he can't swim. Scramble was also a big turning point for the company, as it revolutionized games, as it was the first side-scrolling shooter with forced scrolling and multiple distinct levels, which is cool and all, but I sort of don't care because it looks ugly.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
Good!
Anyone in the audience raise their hands if you're a big Scramble fan. Yeah, that's what I thought. By this point, Konami became a household name, with them releasing games for the Famicom in Japan and the NES in the West. But this is when shit gets real. Meet Hitoshi Akamatsu. This guy was a real piece of work. He came in wanting to make a movie, but if a movie was a game. The guy was a big fan of cinema, so he always approached his projects with a film director's eye, which is sorta neat, because nowadays games are a lot more than just something to play. Story, world building, cinematography are all big parts of games now. Fuck. I'll use one of my favorite games as an example, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. See, if this was designed like Super Mario Bros. On the NES, you'd probably just have a little story in the manual or something, and then you just play the game's levels without much deviation between them. And if there is any, there isn't a lot of cohesiveness. But here, there's more than just a reason to play the game, there's a full-on narrative. The game starts out with a kid just trying to make some money to survive, and later turns into a full-on love story involving the fate of the world, and it gets real emotional at times. And it also just looks cool, and the world feels real and lived in, and it's just cool. Also really like Pyrus kits. Akamatsu was really ahead of his time creating games with a real believable progression in story and world building, and nothing shows this better than Castlevania. He was also really into goth shit. Another big inspiration for Castlevania was gothic literature and film. The most notable would probably be Bram Stoker's Dracula. I call this notable because Dracula is the main antagonist of most Castlevania games, except this one. This one you fight Satan. But there are other classical monsters as well, such as Medusa and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's monster. Speaking of which, I remember when I had to read Frankenstein in high school, and it was a really good book. I really enjoyed it, but it's not that good. I mean, it's like really contrived and stupid. Of course that doesn't make it bad, obviously, because otherwise people wouldn't like this garbage. Anyways, later on we get even more classical monsters from films and books, one big one being the first appearance of Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, which actually predates the Book of Dracula by over 2 decades. She even becomes the second antagonist of the Castlevania anime, which is incredibly good by the way, you should go watch it. Actually, it seems like the whole team really wanted to make this game like a film, because according to Akamatsu, the game was made by people who consciously wanted to do something cinematic. The game originally released as Akumajo Dracula for the Famicom Disk System, and it was so successful it was released in cartridge form for the NES as Castlevania, which I actually have right here. It was also re-released in cartridge form for just the Famicom as well. In North America, they changed the name to Castlevania because the guy who was translating it thought it meant Dracula's Satanic Castle because he was dumb and stupid, and it actually means Demon Castle Dracula, or Dracula Demon Castle. And the senior vice president of Konami of America was uncomfortable with the religious connotations, and so they changed the name to Castlevania, merging the words Castle and Transylvania. Honestly, I like the name Castlevania more. Both titles are actually the name of Dracula's castle itself, but Dracula Demon Castle sounds too on the nose and sounds dumb, whereas Castlevania sounds cool as shit. The NES version of Castlevania even coincided with the 90th anniversary of Bram Stoker's Dracula, really cementing that this guy loves his goth bitches. The protagonist of Castlevania is Simon Belmont, a vampire hunter who wields the vampire killer and was created by Akihiko Nagata. I really like Nagata's design for Simon here, at least in the first game. In the second game he looks like a chode, but here he looks great. He doesn't even look quite like a knight, but he isn't super barbaric either. It just really fits the character, and it gives him some minor personality. In Castlevania 2 he just looks like a knight, which is boring as shit. We won't get to this game for a while, but I still want to talk about it a bit. Ayami Kojima's Castlevania Chronicles Simon Belmont design is hot as fuck. Ayami is very good at making masculine characters look feminine, which adds a different type of personality to the characters. This honestly might be my favorite design for the character. And the red just makes his design pop. I actually think the red hair might be what's canon for the character. Every other incarnation of the character gives him red hair. Obviously there's Chronicles, but in Lords of Shadow and Judgment as well. Honestly, I think the reason Simon is even blonde in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is because the design is just so iconic, with it by far being one of the better selling Castlevania games. For granted, they gave Richter his Rondo of Blood appearance rather than the Symphony of Night design, which is arguably more iconic than Rondo of Blood, so what the hell do I even know? I really like this title screen for the game, and it really shows the film inspiration from the start, with the film reels at the top and the bottom. One thing that's a little weird is that there's no music or even any kind of sound. I'm a bit spoiled with being a huge fan of Mega Man and Dragon Quest, and those have amazing visuals and music for just the title screen, but none of the Castlevania games do this. Okay, so this is actually not true. Castlevania 3 does this, but we'll get to that when we get to that game. Once you hit start, you get a little cutscene of Simon walking up to the castle. Can we just talk about how he walks for a minute? The guy looks like he's coming to fuck you in your ass for looking at him funny. Once we get control of the character, we actually get to walk up to the castle ourselves, so you get to feel like a badass too. Simon uses a whip called the Vampire Killer, which starts out as a leather whip, but gets stronger as you pick up the chain power-ups. The first power-up turns into a chained whip, which doubles its strength, but picking it up again turns it into the Morning Star, which doubles its length, making it easier to hit your targets. I know a lot of people have trouble with the controls in this game because it requires a lot of commitment. Whenever you attack, you stop moving, and it takes a little bit of time to build up for the whip to come out, so if you whip it out just too late, you might just end up getting hit. But the thing I think most people have trouble with is the jump. Simon has momentum in this game, and he always has a set arc he goes through when jumping. Most video game characters give the player some amount of control while you're in the air. Like in Super Mario Bros., despite having momentum, you still have a bit of control of what he does in the air. If you run right and jump, while you're still going to end up right, you're able to determine how far right you want him to go. While in others like Mega Man, you have complete control over your air movement. But here you don't have that, you need to commit. I bet the people that don't like this are the same people who talk to someone romantically for a long time, and when things finally get serious, they back out because they aren't ready for a relationship, but they still interact with you like you two are still together. Just fuck off and commit, it isn't that hard. Despite the NES having 2 buttons, you'd think you'd only be able to do 2 things, jump and attack, but you're wrong, fuckface. You can do 3. When holding up the D-pad and pressing attack, you use your sub-weapon, which uses up your hearts as ammo, which drop from enemies and candles. I remember when I was a kid, I used to think hearts were health. Actually, I thought the same thing with fucking Kid Icarus. I remember picking up so many hearts and wondering why my health wouldn't replenish, but no, to do that, you gotta go find some old ass chicken in the walls. But anyways, back to the sub-weapons. There's 5 in total, and they all do a variety of things. Actually, one thing that they did purposely is put the sub-weapons to specific locations at the beginning of the game based on how difficult it would be for the player to get used to it. You're first introduced to the dagger, which is a simple projectile weapon. All it does is go forward and only hit one enemy. Afterwards, you're introduced to the holy water, which goes forward in a short arc and explodes into flames upon impact. This might be the best weapon in the game. Not only does it damage enemies and bosses, but it stuns them too, utterly raping them in the ass. Next is the stopwatch, which might actually be the worst sub-weapon of the game. It stops times for a few seconds, which you'd think is overpowered, but no, it barely lasts and it costs 5 fucking hearts to use. You're practically paying off a mortgage, but you get no return. Then here's the axe, which is real useful against the boss of the first block. It goes up and forward in a big arc and it really fucks him in the ass. You get the cross on block 2, which is the only sub-weapon not on block 1. It goes straight ahead, but also returns back to you, which is real useful in some cases, but I still think the holy water is my favorite. I gotta clean this shit up before my grandma beats my ass. If you were paying attention earlier, you may have heard me say block, but what is a block? To put it simply, they're sort of like worlds in Mario or zones in Sonic. Each block contains 3 stages. One thing cool about Castlevania that other games didn't at the time was that going into the next stage in a block is seamless. I walk through a door, I walk down or up some stairs, and boom, I'm in the next stage. In Mario and even Sonic, which came out 5 years later on more superior hardware, it fades to black before going on to the next stage. Sonic 3 and Knuckles started doing this after a while, but it came out 8 years after Castlevania. But I don't want to hate on Sonic 3 and Knuckles too much though. It's my favorite game ever made after all. Every time I play it, it's like having sex, but rather than my pee-pee getting hard, my ears and eyes and my whole body just stiffens up. Alright, this is a Castlevania video.
Gary! I was just looking for the sports channel, Gary.
I love the stage design in this game, not so much how it feels to go through them, which does feel great, but how they look. You actually feel like you're progressing through the castle, and it has set pieces that feel like real places you'd find in one. The first few stages mostly consist of just entering the castle and hallways and corridors you'd find in a main entrance. Except I don't know what stage 2 is supposed to be, but I'm not complaining. I think it's supposed to be under the castle, maybe it's part of the sewers, since there's a stage later in the game that explicitly is the sewers. But I don't really care what it is. I know I was just talking about the cohesion of the stages and how much I love it and how they feel real, and some of you might be thinking how a place like this doesn't make too much sense to be here, but I disagree. Castlevania is a place that not only is Dracula's home, but also is a place to monsters to come live because they're ostracized by humanity. If you ever read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it actually makes sense why Frankenstein's monster would live here. This is going to be a bit long and I don't want to have to keep saying Frankenstein's monster, so let's just call him Kevin. In the book, Kevin is against violence, so at first I think he'd be against trying to kill Simon here, but little did I know that I was a fucking idiot. Kevin may be against violence, but he doesn't have much of a choice. Like, how would you feel if you were happy, living in your home, and some asshole busted in and started killing all of your friends? You'd be pretty pissed too. You no longer fights for himself, but for everyone else that you're trying to harm. And in the book, Kevin is real naive too, so it makes sense that he wouldn't understand why you're here in the first place. He just knows you're hurting his friends, and he doesn't like that. You might think it's weird I'm thinking this hard about a game that came out in the 80s that's almost 2 decades older than me. But fuck off, fuckface. I like doing it. But back to the point I was trying to make, this isn't just a castle for Dracula, but a home to many monsters, so having a place like this that seems specialized for the mermen makes perfect sense, at least to me. At the end of the first block you encounter your first boss, the Phantom Bat. I remember the first time fighting this guy and having a lot of trouble. I must have been more retarded than usual because you get the axe right before the boss, indicating that it's probably going to be really helpful for this fight, but once you learn this, it's really easy to fuck him. Block 2 is really neat. It's like you're now getting deep into the castle. You're no longer in the big fancy part with all the lights and shit. This block is rather infamous for introducing the Medusa heads. They come at you going up and down, and for some reason they're real hard for people to dodge. I'm probably in the minority here, but I've never really had trouble with them. If I ever got hit, it was because I was being stupid and hesitating. And most of the time, all you have to do is just walk forward. It's really not that hard. You can actually use the Medusa heads to your advantage, allowing you to skip half of the stage if you jump your time. If you time your jump right. I think a lot of people have trouble here with the spikes as well, which honestly I can understand. It's a little difficult to time, especially since they don't animate smoothly. But the boss of Block 2 is Medusa, who is just a head. Later on in the series we get to see her whole body, but for now it's just her head. And she's a real pushover too, a real pillow princess. You can just spam holy waters on her, and since she gets all wet now, she just stays there and allows herself to get whipped. Block 3 takes place in what I like to call the garden, and as you progress you even return back to the interior. It's cool as shit, I can't stress this enough. One thing I want to mention before we continue is the fucking music of this place. Wicked Child is by far the best music track in the game, and it sounds kick-ass. Vampire Killer is arguably more iconic, which is the track that plays in Block 1, but the only reason I think that's the case is because so many people suck at this game. Sure, it's a good track, a very good track, but so many people die in the first block that they rarely ever get to hear any of the other music. Again, it's not a bad track, but Wicked Child just makes me come.
Squidward will be performing his version of
Vampire Killer in 8-bit.
Yeah!
8-bit.
Alright, yeah!
Speaking of the music, it was actually composed by 2 separate people who weren't working together at all, but somehow it still managed to be cohesive. They definitely had a vision for what they wanted this game to be, and the whole team shared it. Another infamous enemy that's introduced with this block are the Fleamen. They're designed off of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. No, not that one, you dumbass, this one. They jump all over the place and are a real pain to hit. It's possible to get used to their movement, but I'd be lying if I said they didn't catch me off guard on occasion. Once you head back into the interior of the castle, you meet your third boss, the Mummy Man, which really should be called Mummy Men. You'd think since there's two of them that he'd be real hard to beat, but the fact that there are two of him makes him real easy. Each mummy has its own hitbox, and they both share the same health, so if you're able to get them close to each other and hit them with the cross, you're essentially doing double damage. Block 4 starts off with Simon falling down a pit, and what I find real neat about this is that it feels like this was Simon's intention. What I mean by this is that he's just in his normal standing state rather than him in a knockback state. I think if they wanted to show him as falling down a trap, he would have fallen like this. And it's just a neat little bit of polish that I appreciate, or they were just lazy and I'm talking out of my ass. This is where the game starts to get a bit hard. Jumps start to get harder to perform and you take a lot more damage. Not only that, but there's a lot more enemies that are unpredictable. The catacombs are easy enough, but once you start progressing a bit, you have to jump around some moving platforms and it's not really that easy. Once you're back outside, it's just a straight line forward, but what makes this stage so hard are the eagles that drop fleamen. And I mean a lot of fleamen. Even as someone who knows how to deal with them, sometimes it can catch you off guard and really overwhelm you. One thing I want to make note of is that I think it's so cool how when you leave the catacombs, you're outside the castle. Because despite being on the estate, it's not really a part of the castle, and with there being enemies out here, it shows that they now see you as a threat and can't allow you back into the castle. This may not actually be the case, but that's how I always interpret it, and I think it's really cool. There's these Skeledragon enemies that get introduced too, but they are really not that hard since you can just avoid most of them, but they drop a ton of points if you do kill them. The boss is Kevin and Igor. Actually, they call Kevin Frankenstein for some reason, despite that being inaccurate. I mean, come on guys. People get Frankenstein and the monster confused enough as it is. I bet they did this on purpose, those cunts. But anyways, despite me talking about the Frankenstein book in the video, this rendition of the monster is most definitely inspired by the Frankenstein film from 1931, where Frankenstein has a hunchback lab assistant named Igor. This might be the hardest boss in the game. Igor doesn't actually take any damage, so you have to attack Kevin to dwindle down the health bar, and Igor jumps all over the place and shoots at you, and it's real annoying. Because even if you manage to stun Kevin with the holy water, you can't stun Igor, so you can still get hit. Once starting block 5, it shows you shit's about to get real. At the start of every block up to this point, you're always safe. Maybe you gotta go pee or go jack off to Sifo Benaldes, and these little respites are a good place to do that, but not now. You're almost at Dracula, just one more block after this one and you'll be there. This is no time to rest. Or you could just hit pause, but shit's just got real. You're actually in the castle dungeon, which actually makes sense considering that Dracula is evil. I'm sure he has a few captives. That's if he didn't kill them first. I mean, he doesn't kill everyone. There was his wife, and then there's Hector and Isaac, who they made black for some reason in the anime. Not that it's a problem, just a bit weird. However, this Isaac compared to this Isaac are completely different characters personality-wise, so it makes sense to give him a redesign to fit his new personality. It was just a bit of a shock when I first watched it and I heard them call this guy Isaac. But anyways, this is all stuff we can talk about later when we get to those games. The point is that a dungeon is a perfect set piece to be in a location like this. It just really adds to the world. Once you leave the dungeon, you find a hallway of a lot of paintings on the wall and a neat little challenge. The game tests your reflexes with Medusa heads coming at you, adding some grounded enemies as well. It takes a bit to get used to, but it feels really good to get through. Reaching the end introduces us to Death, a character who will reappear over and over again throughout the series. He's certainly just as, if not more, iconic than Dracula himself. In fact, I think he's appeared in even more games than Dracula has. A ton of people have a lot of trouble with this guy, which I don't really understand. If you just throw holy water at him, he'll never have a chance to attack, and it's super easy. At least with Kevin and Igor, you're still able to get hit. Block 6 is definitely the hardest block in the game, but mostly because there's a lot of enemies that are really hard to predict and have a big hitbox. Like the Phantom Bat comes back as a regular enemy, and he's really hard to dodge because of his size. But there's definitely a pattern that you can do on every playthrough to get through unscathed. The next stage is definitely the most iconic set piece in the franchise, the Clock Tower. This set piece is in most if not every Castlevania game, but it makes sense that it's here. I don't know how many castles have clock towers on them, but clock towers are tall, and we're at the top of a castle, so it shows you really how high you are, and that you're at the top of the castle. The final stage takes you directly to Dracula, and even if you lost all of your lives, you just reset back here, which is nice for all of you people who suck at the game. Dracula is no pushover either. He's the only boss that can't be cheesed with a sub-weapon, and I'd argue using a sub-weapon makes it even harder to hit him. You have to hit him in the head, but there's a very narrow time period where you're able to, and he shoots fireballs at you wherever you are, so you have to jump right after he fires them. It's a really tough fight that takes time to get used to, but not everything is good. Once you beat him, he goes into his second phase, but it's just like the other bosses. If you have holy water, which you should because it gives you it right before the boss, you can just stun him indefinitely until you beat him. It's piss easy. But once you beat the game, to prove more the fact that this was inspired by old monster films, the credits are like a movie's credit reel. They give the bosses and enemies names as if they were actors in a film. Haha, it's so cute. Now the game has a lot of arguable problems, like how most of the bosses are really easy to cheese, which is fair, but I don't really mind that much because a lot of passion went into it. That's why I actually enjoy games like these. While they're pretty bad games, I can still have fun with them because you can see the passion and effort the creators put into it. Like, let's talk about another Konami game, for example, Super Bomberman R. Now, while it may be more polished than Sonic 06 and Mighty No. 9, you can just tell that there was zero passion put into it. I'm a big Bomberman fan and I've played most of the games, and there's a lot of cute and unique characters and stories, but Super Bomberman R just fucks all of that. They create a bunch of new bombers for the game, which isn't inherently a problem, but when asked on Twitter what characters they should add to the game as updates, someone told them to put in more Bomberman characters, and you know what Konami said? They're all here, which is a fucking lie. What they did instead was add different characters from different Konami franchises as characters in the game, which isn't that big of a deal, but you can tell it's only a thing simply to get people to buy it and think that it's novel, when in reality it's a lifeless, soulless product. But it's the best-selling Bomberman game, so now we're getting a sequel, which will probably be just as fucking soulless as the last one. Sorry, this was about Castlevania. While Castlevania may have some problems, and definitely some glitches, a lot of passion went into it, and I could really appreciate that. And really, this is the case with most of the Castlevania games, even the ones that are considered pretty unenjoyable by the Castlevania community. It's because of this passion that I've become such a big fan of the series and played all the games, except this one. Now obviously they're just really fun games, but the passion is certainly appreciated too.